Hey, I'm Matt Levy, and today I'll be addressing a politically charged song from four musicians that reflect, critique, and at times mock imperialism in one form or another. Two artists will be from the perspective of the oppressor. We have Bob Dylan and The Clash, while two artists will be writing from the perspective of the oppressed, Fela Kuti and Kendrick Lamar. This will be used to highlight the hybridity of post-colonialism. Bob Dylan's "God on Our Side" challenges Americans' complacency to uphold their foreign and domestic policies, driven by the spirit of manifest destiny. Our education system has us memorize the heroes, as Dylan puts sarcastically, and silence those who were oppressed by the hands of colonization. His lyrics, "With God on Our Side," comment on America's undying thirst to gain power and to otherwise expand their empire. It's Americans' belief that they are in some way entitled to the land of others due to the favor of God that Bob Dylan criticizes. He furthermore addresses the distorted image carried out by our history books that the Indians fell. This term "fell" seems to be purposely placed to show how we perceive our territorial expansion as a competition of sorts, a survival of the fittest, as they might put it. It was taught to him that their conquest was earned. It's this rags to riches, Citizen Kane, the Great Gatsby, this American ideology that if you work hard, you get results. Bob Dylan grows more obvious in his disdain for American foreign leadership when he states, "The Second World War came to an end. We forgave the Germans, and then we were their friends. Though they murdered 6 millions in the ovens they fried, the Germans now too had God on their side. It's our hypocrisy to spread democracy, freedom, to carry out the moral high ground that seems painfully obvious to Bob Dylan." He comes from the position of the oppressor, choosing to reflect on America's almost sanctimonious tendency to extend its power on unwanted recipients. Bob Dylan highlights a key step in rejecting the legacies of colonialism, becoming aware, and more importantly, speaking on these revelations, addressing them, and being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Next, we have Fela Kuti. If you haven't listened, I plead with you to do so. This song is a great introduction to his music. In the song, he speaks on the Nigerian government's tendency to intimidate through brute force. Police officers and armies were often sent down to disrupt protests and rebellions. Yet, he didn't see the corruption of Nigerian officials to be the root of his country's socio-economic problems, its political distrust, or its political corruption. He understood the problem as one of colonialism. He has spoken about assimilation forced upon him during his educational years. He even claimed that he felt English for a chunk of his childhood. How would he not? His schools wouldn't even allow him to speak his native language. He often speaks of colonizers as being essentially teachers. He claimed that the English taught them everything they knew, especially politics. It is therefore the responsibility of the teacher for the deterioration of his country, for the students can't be held responsible when the teacher has taught them nonsense. This nonsense, according to Kuti, is democracy. Everybody scatter, scatter. Here, Fela Kuti speaks about the violence protesters are often met with, the panic that stems from police brutality and civilian fatalities. The sorrow, tears, and blood are the consequences of rebellion. It is the regular trademark of imperialism. He begs for his country to end their colonial mentality, as he believes that his people haven't broken out of the imperialist chains, in fear of retaliation a rebellion would provoke. He asks his brothers not to back down from this inevitable retaliation, but rather to stand up to it. Fela Kuti highlights another key step in rejecting the legacies of colonialism, to actively promote social change by challenging the status quo. Once you've reflected on the legacies, you must actively challenge them by addressing the roots of the problem, the provokers, the instigators, the oppressors, you name it. The Clash's "Charlie Don't Surf" speaks on the assimilation forced upon the Vietnamese in America's quest to spread democracy and that good old American capitalism. Their term "strangers" is thrown around in this song. It demonstrates American xenophobia in dealing with a difference in culture. The Clash consistently mock America, referring to them as "hamburger mama" and proclaiming that Africa is choking on their Coca-Cola. This line is particularly fascinating because it represents the fact that Africans are choking from the result of assimilation, whereas it can also symbolize the inhumane conditions in which Africans are forced to manufacture Coca-Cola and other products for Americans and other developed nations. The line, "Charlie don't surf, and we think he should," represents the American mentality. Not then, not before, not now, but always. It is this idea that to not be American is to not be right, to not be civilized. The idea that colonialization shouldn't be only attached to circumstances such as the Belgian regime of the Congo. It doesn't have to be bloody, violent, or gruesome, which of course America has done those as well, but it can also be forced assimilation or cultural extermination. The Clash begs the Vietnamese and all those oppressed by America and other imperialist nations to follow their spirit of their own culture, to do as they see best. The clash highlights another key step in rejecting the legacies of colonialization as an ally. Now that you can reflect on these legacies, understand them, and communicate through effective dialogue, you must align yourself with the interests of the oppressed, give them room to lead, and follow behind and support, for they know what is best. Lastly, we have Kendrick Lamar's The Blacker the Berry, the most modern take of domestic imperialism. I can analyze this song for hours on end, and I still would only have dissected a third of it, but I'll do what I can this limited amount of time. The main concept I hope to take away from this is the idea of institutionalization. This idea that the concentration of poverty many African Americans are forced to grow up in shaped them, claiming that it turned them into a killer. When economic prosperity is impossible, when social mobility is unlikely, when your education system is broken, you still need to survive. City planners, local politicians, the federal government all sabotage their communities. The urban renewal process demolished thriving black neighborhoods for the expansion of highways and threw African American communities into high-rise projects with little maintenance. Gentrification raised the price of housing for historically black inner cities and forced them out. Kendrick Lamar points to white Americans' myth and the reciprocation of freedom. For today, it is only a dream. Institutionalization, stuckness, immobility, generations of African American families unable to escape poverty, forced into a life of uncertainties. It becomes home for Kendrick Lamar, a place to run back to, for it is only a place he truly knows. To simply go to school, get an education, get a career, we are only encouraging the history of oppression to continue onwards. We must show civil engagement, protest, speak with public officials, read, listen to other perspectives, but most importantly, vote. For the love of God, vote. Here are a list of the steps I mentioned throughout the presentation, just in a chronological order and able to understand it visually. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to all the artists I was hoping to. Mos Def, his incredible song, New World Water, really kind of examines just from a simplistic view about how water can be used as power, but then is able to bring that about in a more of a holistic sense to tackle imperialism and colonialization. I was also hoping to have a slide specifically on Miriam Makebe's Aluta Continua, an incredible African singer, but it extended my time past 8 minutes, so I'll mention her quickly here. The song was written by her daughter. It expresses their support for Mozambique and their fight for independence. Well, I appreciate you guys listening. Please comment and ask me any questions if you'd like to know any more. Thank you.